Imagine carrying a child for 9 months, enduring the pain of labor, only to discover 7 years later that the hospital may have given you the wrong baby. What would you do? Would you fight to reclaim your biological child or keep the one you raised with love? This is the story of two Nigerian families whose lives were forever changed the night their babies were swapped at birth. The sound of the rain hitting the rusty roof of St. Mary's General Hospital in Port Harcourt echoed like drums of fate. Inside the dimly lit maternity ward, women groaned in pain, nurses rushed about, and an air of tension filled the night. Caroline had been in labor for 16 hours. Her husband, Michael, paced outside the delivery room, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cool evening breeze. He was a struggling mechanic, but tonight he felt like the richest man alive because he was about to meet his first child. Caroline's cries grew weaker until finally the cry of a newborn pierced through the night. Michael's heart leaped. One of the nurses came out with a tired smile and said, "Congratulations, sir. Your wife has delivered safely. It's a baby girl." Michael hugged himself in joy. He rushed to see Caroline, who lay weak but smiling on the hospital bed. Beside her was a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Caroline's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but her heart was full. She whispered, "Michael, our daughter, our blessing." He squeezed her hand, whispering with trembling lips, "Thank you for giving me a reason to live." But what they did not know was that in the next ward, another woman had given birth that same night. Her name was Gloria, the wife of a wealthy businessman. Unlike Caroline's humble setting, Gloria's ward was filled with expensive flowers, fruits, and gifts. Doctors treated her with special attention, and nurses moved around carefully as though walking on eggshells. It was in this environment that a mistake, or perhaps something darker, happened. A nurse, pressured by orders and distracted by confusion, carried Caroline's baby girl into Gloria's ward. At the same time, Gloria's baby, a fragile boy, was taken to Caroline. The swap was unnoticed, hidden under the noise and chaos of the night. Days later, Caroline and Michael carried home what they thought was their daughter. They named her Grace, a name chosen after Caroline whispered through tears, "This child is truly God's grace upon our lives." Grace grew up in a humble two-room apartment where Michael's mechanic earnings barely kept food on the table. Caroline worked as a tailor, often sewing late into the night. But despite their struggles, they gave Grace love, prayers, and hope. She was a lively child, always laughing and asking questions that made her parents smile. Meanwhile, across town in a mansion with marble floors and shining chandeliers, Gloria and her husband, Chief Williams, raised the boy they believed was theirs. They called him Daniel. He grew up spoiled, showered with expensive toys, international school fees, and servants at his beck and call. But unlike Grace, Daniel was often rude, impatient, and reckless. Years rolled by, and soon Grace was 7 years old. She was intelligent, respectful, and top of her class in the local primary school. Teachers praised her, neighbors admired her, and Caroline often whispered to Michael, "Our daughter is destined for greatness." But in the Williams mansion, Daniel had become a headache. He was constantly suspended from school for bullying, lying, and even stealing from other children. Gloria cried many nights, wondering why her son was so different despite their wealth and efforts. One Sunday afternoon, fate began to stir the hidden truth. Grace fell seriously ill after returning from church. She shivered with fever, her lips pale and her tiny hands shaking. Caroline rushed her to the same St. Mary's Hospital where she had given birth years ago. As the doctor examined her, he frowned. He called in another nurse, whispered something, and then checked her again. Caroline's heart raced. Michael, who had just arrived, demanded to know what was happening. The doctor looked uneasy and said, "We need to run a few urgent tests. Something is not adding up." Caroline clutched her daughter's hand, fear gripping her chest. She had no idea that the night of Grace's birth still held a secret that would soon shake her entire world. Caroline could not sleep that night. She sat by Grace's hospital bed, praying quietly, while Michael paced the corridor outside. The doctor had taken blood samples and promised results by morning, but Caroline's heart told her that something deeper was wrong. At dawn, the doctor walked in with two nurses. His face was serious. He cleared his throat and said, "Madam, sir, there is something unusual in the test results. Your daughter's blood type does not match either of yours." Michael blinked, confused. He said, "Doctor, what do you mean?" "She is our child. I carried her from birth." The doctor adjusted his glasses. "I am not saying she is not your child, but scientifically, it is impossible for both of you to give birth to a child with this blood type." Caroline felt her chest tighten. She whispered, Maybe there was a mistake in the test. Please run it again." The doctor agreed, but the second test came back with the same result. Michael grew angry. He shouted, "Are you trying to say my wife cheated on me? Is that what you are implying?" Caroline broke into tears. She shook her head. "Michael, you know me. I would never do that. This must be something else." The doctor sighed and said softly, "Madam, sir, I do not want to cause trouble, but sometimes mistakes happen in hospitals during delivery. I suggest you allow us to check our records from the night she was born." Michael stormed out, but Caroline stayed behind, holding Grace tightly. The little girl looked up at her mother and whispered weakly, "Mommy, am I going to die?" Caroline forced a smile and said, "No, my love. You will live. God is with you." But deep inside, her heart was trembling. Later that week, Caroline was called back to the hospital. The head nurse brought out old files, flipping through yellowed pages. Then she froze. Her face turned pale. She stammered, "On the night you gave birth, another delivery took place here. A baby boy born to Mrs. Gloria Williams." Caroline's eyes widened. She whispered, "Gloria Williams? The rich woman?" The nurse nodded nervously. "I don't know how, but there's a record showing confusion in the nursery that night. 2 babies were moved between wards. I don't know who authorized it, but it is possible the babies were swapped." Caroline staggered back, her hand over her mouth. Michael, who had followed reluctantly, grabbed the file and read for himself. His knees weakened. That evening, Caroline could not eat. She sat in silence, staring at Grace, who was now recovering. She remembered every smile, every hug, every sleepless night sewing clothes just to pay school fees. She whispered, "Whether or not she came from my womb, she is my child." But Michael's heart was boiling. He said, "If this is true, then our real child is out there somewhere, growing up in another man's house. I must know." Meanwhile, in the Williams mansion, Gloria and Chief Williams were also facing their own storm. Daniel had been caught again, this time stealing jewelry from his own aunt during a family party. Gloria wept bitterly, asking herself where she went wrong as a mother. Chief Williams was furious, threatening to send the boy to a strict boarding school. But fate was about to tie their lives together. A week later, the hospital arranged for a private meeting between the two families. Caroline and Michael sat nervously in the waiting room, holding Grace's hand. Then the doors opened, and in walked Gloria with her husband, and beside them was Daniel, the boy who was supposed to be theirs. Caroline froze. She looked at Daniel's face, his eyes, his smile. Something about him looked familiar. Michael gasped, whispering, "He looks just like me when I was a boy." Grace tugged at her mother's dress and whispered innocently, "Mommy, who are these people?" The doctor cleared his throat and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, Mr. and Mrs. Williams, we have reasons to believe that your children may have been swapped at birth." The room fell into heavy silence. Gloria's jaw dropped. Michael clenched his fists. Caroline felt her world spinning. And Daniel, the boy in the fancy clothes, looked at Grace and sneered, "Who are these poor people?" The air inside the hospital conference room was tense. The shocking truth had been revealed, and now both families sat staring at each other in disbelief. The Okafors clung to Grace as if the world wanted to rip her away, while the Williams held Daniel close, their faces pale with confusion. The doctor explained again how the error might have happened. Then, trembling, He pointed to the nurse who had been on duty that night. She was a middle-aged woman, her face drenched in sweat, her hands shaking. She fell to her knees, crying bitterly. "Please forgive me," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. The babies were both crying that night, and in my confusion, I carried the wrong one to the wrong mother." I never thought it would come to this. But her apology was too little, too late. The hospital board dismissed her immediately. Later, she was stripped of her nursing license and sentenced to community service for negligence. Her tears filled the courtroom, but many said it was justice for the pain she had caused two innocent families. The Williams, hurt and angry, demanded their biological child back. Chief Williams stood tall in court and said, "Your Honor, this child is ours. We were robbed of 7 years with our true daughter. We want the children swapped back immediately." But Caroline broke into tears. She fell to her knees in front of the judge and cried, "My Lord, Grace is my life. I carried her when she was sick. I fed her with my sweat. I don't care about blood. She is my daughter." The court became silent, except for the soft sobs echoing from the families. The judge, an elderly man with years of wisdom, studied both children. He watched Grace as she respectfully held her mother's hand, whispering words of comfort. Then he turned to Daniel, who folded his arms and scoffed impatiently, muttering, "This is boring." After a long pause, the judge cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, it is true that Grace is your biological daughter, and Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, Daniel is yours. But what I see here today is more than blood. One child has been raised with love and discipline, while the other has been spoiled into ruin." The Williams lowered their heads in shame. The judge continued, "I will not order a permanent swap today. Instead, I am giving you 1 year. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, you must raise Daniel with the same values, patience, and attention that the Okafors gave Grace. Within that year, if Daniel shows good character, then both children may return to their biological parents. Until then, they will remain where they are." The verdict shook the courtroom. The Okafors cried with relief, while the Williams felt the weight of the responsibility ahead. From that day, the Williams' mansion changed. Gloria stopped spending her days at parties and gatherings. Chief Williams began coming home early, refusing unnecessary business meetings. Instead, they sat with Daniel, helped with his homework, prayed with him, and even took him to the mechanic shop where Michael worked to teach him humility. At first, Daniel resisted. He threw tantrums, complained about chores, and shouted at his parents. But Gloria was patient, remembering how Caroline had pleaded in court. Chief Williams also softened, exchanging harsh punishments for guidance and encouragement. Slowly, Daniel's heart began to change. For the first time, he washed dishes, carried groceries, and even shared his toys with neighborhood children. His teachers noticed the difference. He no longer bullied, but instead started helping his classmates. At school, people whispered that Daniel had become a new boy. 1 year later, both families were summoned back to court. The children had grown taller, their faces brighter. Grace held her parents' hands, and Daniel walked confidently beside the Williams, his face calm and respectful. The judge looked at them and said, "It is time. The children should now be returned to their biological parents." But the courtroom was filled with silence. Caroline cried, clinging to Grace. Gloria, too, wiped her eyes and whispered, "I cannot let Daniel go. He is part of me now." Chief Williams stepped forward and said, "My lord, we cannot swap them back. The love we now share is stronger than blood." Michael added, "My lord, these children have found family in both homes. Let us remain as we are, but let us also become one family." The judge was moved to tears. He nodded slowly and said, "Very well. If you all agree, then so be it. The children will stay where they are, but both families must remain united as one." And so it was. From that day, the Okafors and the Williams became inseparable. The Williams supported the Okafors financially, helping them move into a bigger house and supporting Grace's education. The Okafors, in turn, taught humility and contentment to the Williams, often inviting them to simple family meals filled with laughter and warmth. The children grew up like siblings. Grace and Daniel celebrated birthdays together every year, cutting cakes side by side. At school, they proudly told their classmates, "We are twins," even though no one could understand how. Their stories spread far and wide, touching hearts. Neighbors wept when they saw the bond between the two families. It was a bond born from pain, but mended by love. Years later, whenever Grace and Daniel spoke about their lives, they always said, "Family is not just blood. Family is love, sacrifice, and the people who never give up on you." This is the end of this story. Now let me ask you, if you were in Caroline and Michael's shoes, or even in Gloria and Chief William's place, what would you have done? Would you fight to take your biological child back? Or would you keep the child you raised with love? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear from you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next powerful story. Until next time, stay blessed and always remember, family is not just blood, it is love.